Hi guys, it's Isabella and welcome back to my channel. Today I wanted to talk about how I got a 7 in HL Philosophy and how you can too. Much like my last video, I realized this might not be useful to a lot of people given the current situation because I know the IB exams in May have now been cancelled, but just in case anyone is planning on taking their exams in November, or if you've just finished your first year of IB and are planning on taking your exams next year, I hope these tips can still be helpful for you. Tip number 1 is to read as much as possible. Don't just go to class, take notes from what your teacher said, and then go home and forget about it until you have to study for your exams or write your essays. Some really good resources for reading more about the topics that you've learned in class are Wikipedia. I know teachers like to criticize Wikipedia very often for its inaccurate information, but most of the time, as long as you're not writing a report or anything like that and you're just looking to expand your knowledge, Wikipedia is a great resource for learning more about philosophical ideas that might not have been so clear to you during class time. Once you've read through the Wikipedia page, something a little bit more sophisticated would be IEP, or the Internet Encyclopedia of Philosophy. They provide really great summaries for most Western philosophical thought, which is what you tend to do in the IB, and are really good for gaining a deeper understanding of anything that you might have missed during class. My favorite resource, even though I still use all of these resources now as someone who studies philosophy in university, would be the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. This encyclopedia provides really great detail and really great insight into a bunch of different philosophical ideas. Basically, any philosopher or any philosophical idea that you study during your IB philosophy course, you will find a page for it on the Stanford Encyclopedia. They also tend to provide quotations and really in-depth referencing so that if you want to look at the primary text in which the philosopher originally wrote about this idea, you can also do that. The reason that I recommend people read and research outside of class is that sometimes your teacher may go too quickly, or you may not have understood what was said in class, or it's a topic that you're particularly struggling with. Researching and reading on your own is a really good way to find out how other people would explain certain topics, and it also helps you write your own essays once you think about and read all the different ways that one same topic could be explained. It also helps you develop more ideas for criticisms or possible evaluation points in your essays because it shows you a lot of different perspectives and already well-regarded criticisms that people might have. I find researching and reading more particularly helpful when writing essays for homework because you have access to the internet, unlike during your exams, and hopefully that will help you practice for when you're in the final exam space and you'll know more information than just what you would have learned during class time. It's also a good way to find out more philosophical thought that you might not have had the chance to learn in school and could be something that you find interesting and you would want to write about in your essays. That brings me on to tip number 2. Write about things that you find interesting and write what you know. There's no point, especially for paper 1, trying to memorize every single topic that you're going to learn throughout your 2-year course. In paper 1, you're only going to answer 3 questions, and so you're not going to use every topic that you learned throughout your course. What I would recommend is having a very detailed knowledge of about 3 philosophers or 3 philosophical ideas for each core theme and optional theme that you'll be writing on in paper 1. So for example, for my optional theme of ethics, I had a pretty solid idea of how to write a utilitarianism essay. I had a pretty solid idea of how to talk about Aristotelian virtue ethics, and I had a pretty good idea of how to talk about Kant's deontological ethics. So I would definitely recommend just writing 3 essay plans for each section that you're going to do and knowing those essay plans pretty well so that you're already prepared when you go into the exam instead of trying to memorize everything from every single topic because you'll just be really overwhelmed and struggle to remember everything. For paper 2, I would really recommend using Spark Notes if the book that you're studying is available on there. Personally, what I did is I would read each chapter in the book and then I would read each Spark Notes summary of that chapter before writing down my own summary of each chapter so that I would know exactly what the book was talking about. If you're taking IB in a year where they haven't changed the syllabus in the last 2 or 3 years, I would recommend looking at past papers for paper 2 and seeing what questions commonly come up for the text that you're reading. For example, I read Nietzsche's Genealogy of Morality for my paper 2 text, and in many of the past papers they asked about the slave-master morality, the idea of guilt, and Nietzsche's concept of the will to power. I knew that in order to prepare for my paper 2, I had to know those 3 topics really well. My 4th tip would be about introductions. So people often underestimate the power of introductions in their essays. A lot of the time people will write their essays and then go back to their introductions now that they know what they've written. I would strongly recommend against doing this, because if you write without having an introduction, then you don't know what you're going to write, and it's likely to be very messy and disorganized and not follow a clear train of thought. My teacher taught me the SPIAT method of writing an introduction. So what that stands for is stimulus, philosophical issue, approaches, and thesis. So your stimulus part would be just summarizing what the stimulus says. So for example, in paper 1 for core theme, you usually get a piece of text as one of the possible stimuli, or a picture. So the stimulus part of SPIAT would be saying the stimulus shows a picture of a celebrity and his wax figure, for example. And then philosophical issue would be something like, this raises the philosophical issue of identity, or this raises the philosophical issue of the mind-body problem, because a celebrity with his wax figure shows that the physical body may not be purely representative of what each individual is. And then the A part stands for approaches. So approaches would be saying, this philosopher says this. So for example, in regards to the mind-body problem, Descartes would suggest a dualist system in which we have a separate mind and body, and then perhaps half a sentence summary of what that approach would be, and then a counter approach that you may say in your essay. So you could say, however, Gilbert Ryle suggests that we're merely a mechanical body and there's no such thing as a soul, and there's no such thing as a dualist system. And then finally, you have your thesis, which basically says what you're going to say in the essay. So that would be something like, in this essay, I will argue that X philosophical idea is good because of ABC, however, it is problematic because of XYZ. Instead, this philosophical idea more adequately answers the question of whatever philosophical issue you've raised. If you write your introduction like that, that's a really good way of showing your examiner what you're going to be talking about, and so they can look for those points in your essay and give you as many marks as possible. But it's also a really good way for you to keep focus and know what you're going to write throughout your essay. Your introduction is definitely the most important part of your essay, so once you have a solid introduction, it should help the rest of your essay flow smoothly. My 5th tip would be to not worry about the philosophers, but worry about the philosophical ideas that you're presenting. Don't write a backstory about the philosopher. Don't talk about when they were born or like the historical context that they're writing in, unless it's relevant to your essay question. In the IB for philosophy, philosophers are just a way of propelling your philosophical ideas forward. In fact, if you look at the mark scheme, you don't need to mention a single philosopher in order to get full marks in your essay. However, I would strongly recommend using philosophers because they're a great way of propelling the arguments that you want to put forward. So make sure that you focus on the ideas that you're talking about and what's good and bad about the ideas, not what each philosopher cares about in their entire history as a philosopher and as a person. The final tip that I have for getting a 7 in IB philosophy is always ask yourself why. So you know when you're around children and you say a statement and they keep asking why? Make sure to ask yourself the same thing when you're writing a philosophy essay. Let's say that you're going to be arguing that Mill's approach to utilitarianism or Mill's approach to morality is better than that of Bentham. So you would ask yourself, why? Okay, so I think that Bentham commits a naturalistic fallacy in his approach to utilitarianism. And then you would say, why? Okay, so this is how the naturalistic fallacy is committed. And then you would ask yourself, okay, why is this a problem? Then you would talk about the implications for this criticism. So always be asking yourself, why am I writing this? Why is this significant? Why does this matter? Something that's really important to take into account when you're doing IB philosophy is, what are the implications of this statement? There's no point just suggesting criticism and leaving it at that. You should convince the reader that they should care that this criticism is problematic or presents a downfall for this philosophical idea. Or if you're justifying a philosophical idea, you should say why you think it's good. Why should the reader believe that what you're saying is an accurate portrayal of what it means to be human? Why should the reader believe that what you're saying is a good method of morality to follow? Imagine that you're trying to convince this child who keeps asking you why? And that way you'll always make sure to talk about the philosophical implications whenever you're answering a question. I hope these tips have helped someone out there who's studying for IB philosophy, and if you have any more questions, feel free to leave them in the comments below. Bye!